Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. G'day and welcome to Voice of Gord. I'm Gord and this is my voice. Today on the show we have Mr. Graham Brown, a UK-based trucker and writer behind the Lorryist substack. Graham's an excellent writer and he sat down with me and shared his thoughts on trucking in the UK and Europe, politics over that way, various writers and intellectuals he's a fan of, such as Curtis Yarvin, the late James Burnham, and the YouTuber Academic Agent. Graham's a real mensch. He's quite a good writer. I could only wish to craft my words as well as he does. It was a real pleasure having him on to share his experiences and perspectives and, just what life's like over on his side of the pond. I hope you guys enjoy our discussion. If you're a trucker, you're really going to dig this one. Graham's an excellent guy. When you're all done listening to this, go and subscribe to his Substack. He's a fantastic writer. I can't emphasize that enough. And without any further delay, here's my conversation with the Lorryist. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord. How's it going? Today, I have a very special guest, Mr. Graham Brown, who writes on Substack as the Lorryist. He is the first and thus far only other truck driver I've bumped into on Substack, and he has some very interesting perspectives and things to say. Drives all over Europe, from what I can gather, and then in his spare time, spends a lot of intellectual capital trying to figure out what's going on with the world, and he's got some interesting things to say. Hello, Graham.
Yeah, good morning, God. How you doing?
Oh, I'm fantastic, thank you. Cheers for joining us.
Yeah, you're
Um,
welcome. I'll just correct you on one thing. I'm not driving all over Europe at the moment. I'm UK only.
oh,
Whatever.
okay, all right.
Yeah,
There was a couple of your photos on Twitter and Substack
yeah.
showed your truck in Italy and Belgium and here and there and everywhere.
Yeah, that was last year. Yeah. I've just switched back to UK only for family reasons, but I have driven all over Europe. It's no point.
Right. So where exactly are you located?
Exactly. I'm not going to say. In North Norfolk, UK, which is you're in upstate New York. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I live near Ithaca, which is about a 4.5 hour drive northwest of
Oh,
New York City.
okay. Well, I'm probably a bit closer to London than you are to New York, if that makes sense. So I am upstate England, I suppose. Um, it's the east of England. You look at a map of the UK, and there's the bit that bulges out into the North Sea. Um, I live in that bit,
Are
basically.
you near Grimsby?
Depends what you mean by near. Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, why? Why Grimsby? You know, so
Well, my geographical knowledge of England is fairly limited, but I've got a mental map of England, and in it, I remember Grimsby being in the east, and Grimsby is also a town in Canada, which was like the town next
uh,
over from where I grew up.
okay, yeah, yeah. That's a bit further up the coast. That's in Lincolnshire. That's north of the Wash. We can't. I don't want to get too geeky about the layout of the UK, but the Wash is the bit of the sea that comes in inland. It is kind of inlet of the sea, north of here. So
Right.
Grimsby is a bit further up the coast. Um, anyway, yeah.
Right. So you're trucking within England and no longer going to Europe. You're not, are you going up to Scotland at all, or are you just staying close to
I
home?
yeah. Usually I go up to Scotland. Quite often go up to Scotland. Yeah, pretty much anywhere on the mainland UK. So England, Scotland, and Wales.
Right.
You know,
So
so,
I've been to the UK twice in my life. Once doesn't even really count. I just sort of changed planes in London. Um, but my mother's from Scotland, and
okay,
so her parents were. My grandmother was from Glasgow, and my grandfather was from Airdrie. And
okay,
in
yeah,
2008, I took them back home because they immigrated to Canada in 1962 and they never really went home. I had this whole 3 week holiday laid out for them. We hired a car and I drove them all over Scotland. They saw more of Scotland with me than when they actually lived there. Because, back in the day, people forget that, like, all of this wonderful material wealth that we have these days, it wasn't always thus. And my
yeah.
grandparents lived in tenement housing
Mm,
and
mm,
didn't have a
yeah,
car. And, like, I think I remember seeing pictures when I was a kid. The only time my grandparents ever went on holidays before they immigrated to Canada, they went to Ireland and they took
uh-huh,
the boat. Like, they took a train from Airdrie to Glasgow and then got on a ship and took a ferry to Ireland, and I think they took public
yeah,
transit while they were in Ireland. So
yeah, yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
I drove them all
I,
over Scotland, and one of the things I noticed about Scotland is there's a lot of single lane highway in Scotland. Like, there's
mm,
literally one lane, and then they have
yep,
these like pull out areas for you to pass each other,
yep,
which is bizarre to me in 2008. I didn't realize like
yeah.
Scotland is
Oh,
actually really rugged.
Scotland's amazing. It's a beautiful country. I mean, the weather's usually terrible. It's very dark this time of year, but it's very much a beautiful country. Glasgow's a bit rough. I think people still live in tenements and don't have cars, but um, the the countryside is absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't normally drive on those roads. When I'm going out to Scotland, I'm going up to the city. So even if I'm going north to Inverness, I'm on the main roads. But we've got roads like that all over the UK. So when I'm driving, I'm quite often having to go down single lane roads. So with not much in the way of passing places. That's true in England and Wales as well. Especially when you get out to the rural areas, like out to the West Country, or even some parts around here in East Anglia. We're a country that wasn't designed for vehicles. So we've some of our town centres and rural areas are quite difficult to drive in from that point of view.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys have so much more history there, and one of the things that struck me about there was a in one of your Substack posts, you're um going on about listening to audiobooks and
Yep,
how
yep,
you were driving through Spain and listening to
yeah,
Cervantes and
yes,
listening to a book by Robert Carlyle while you were driving around Scotland, and
yeah,
I mean that hits a bit different, as the kids say, when you're in Europe, which is, maybe not the cradle of civilization, but the cradle of Western civilization
yeah,
for sure. And then, many parts of America and Canada are still, I mean, I wouldn't say they're the Wild West, but, I used to haul fuel from Edmonton to Yellowknife, which is a 1,000-mile drive.
right, yeah,
And
yeah,
once you get a little ways out of Edmonton, especially when you get north of say Valley View and Peace River, there's nothing. I mean, you'll drive for like you'll there's a little town called High Level where there's a big timber mill, and once you get past High Level, it's another 500 miles to Yellowknife, and there's nothing. It's just bush.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
and what I mean and what I also mean by nothing is that there's no, like, other than the natives, there was no, like, not really any civilization there. Whereas, if you're driving around any part of Europe, I mean, especially, Spain or Italy, you
yeah,
know 2000 years ago, there was a society there that built things. All right.
yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
We don't have that here.
Well, you look up a writer called Graham Hancock who wrote a book called America Before, And apparently, the prehistory of the United States is much longer and much more interesting than may be true. But that's another topic. But
Yeah,
um,
my friend Brett's a big fan of Graham Hancock. If I had more
okay,
time to read, I would dig into it. Yeah, um, he's one of those guys. If you listen to Hancock on Joe Rogan or something like that, you're
yeah,
just
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh man, I just get tired listening to the guy, given everything he's researched.
yeah. I know what I mean. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I'd quite like to experience that kind of wide open space. Coming from the UK, which is one of the most crowded parts of the world, we're one of the highest population densities anywhere, especially England, especially the south of England. Um, I would. It's very tempting. Every now and again, I see ads, for drivers wanted in Canada, and it's very tempting for me to start the process, but for different reasons, I've elected to stay here, and down under as well. New Zealand and Australia look very interesting places to drive, very different from here. Because of course you drove in Australia, didn't you?
Yeah, I took me 4 tries, but I finally realized my boyhood dream of driving road trains down there.
Okay,
Uh,
okay,
yeah, Australia is different, man, especially once you get off the East Coast. Eastern New South Wales, Victoria, the southeast corner of Queensland, very densely populated. Everyone's kind of hugging the ocean, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Surf beach lifestyle, so to speak. But
Uh-huh.
once you go west, man, there is nothing. There is nothing and nobody.
Yeah, yeah,
That drive across the Nullarbor Highway between Port Augusta and Kalgoorlie in Western Australia. Oh man, there is not a whole lot going on that road.
So you're saying it's different from the Brussels Ring Road? This is what we're saying here. So there's some slight differences going on there, Okay, okay.
Yeah, I've never been to Belgium. I went to Barcelona. I've been to
Mm.
Portugal, Spain. Been to
Okay.
Lisbon a couple times. I like again. I transited through London, and I've been to train stations in London. I never got out.
Okay.
What's the ring road around London? Is that the M1 or M25 or something?
M20, the notorious M25, um, notorious for crazy, crazy heavy traffic, um, and being completely random. Like you can get traffic jams on a Sunday afternoon, and you can get a clear run at 6 o'clock on a Friday night. It never makes sense, but crazy amounts of traffic, and I think it's now taking double the capacity, double the amount of cars it was designed for.
Wow.
It's,
Yeah.
it's absolutely crazy. And you got to imagine UK is long, and a lot of our trade is with the continent, Europe. So everything's got to come in through Kent. Well, almost everything. If people are driving trucks from the continent into the UK, they're going to come in through the Kent ports, um, and then go north. There's nowhere else to go. And that means they've got to go around the N25 to bypass London. So the eastern stretch of the N25 is always jammed full of trucks, especially the river crossing. There's the Dartford River crossing, which is a tunnel one way and a bridge the other, and that is always jammed up. It's just taking the amount of traffic that goes through there is far beyond what they imagine, and there's nothing they can do. It's all built up. It's all developed, and it's very difficult for them to build new road capacity. So it's just jammed up.
It's funny you mentioned that because this serves as something of an analogy for um some of the issues you and others explore around globalization and the sort of deficiency of our governments in that Western society is getting quite full of people and
Yeah,
those in charge want it to keep going that way without it giving any thought to how we're going to handle them all or the needs, wants, or desires of the people that already live here, right?
yeah. Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
And
it's yeah. Sorry, go on.
no, go ahead.
No, it's. I mean, I don't know what it's like in the US, but the amount of immigration now into the UK has got absolutely crazy. And the more people are resistant to it, I don't know, they conducted polls of the British people since the 1960s and 50s even, where consistently the British people want less immigration. Um, but it keeps getting more, you know. And I think it was a record this year. 500,000 people have come in, and it's almost like the powers that be. They basically want to slap the people in the face. They want to say, "Okay, yeah, we hear you, but screw you. We're just going to carry on bringing people." It's a really, if we really had a democracy, this wouldn't be happening. They would do something to stop immigration because that's what the people want. If it's a democracy, you do what the people want. You at least give people what they want, and that's not something difficult to give. And they're not doing it. It's absolutely the Conservative Party here have basically. It's difficult to describe what they've done. I mean, we had the Brexit vote, as you know, and one of the things about Brexit was people were fed up with the amount of immigration, especially in England, and that didn't happen. That didn't happen for 4 years or so because the powers that be were so resistant to actually carrying it out. And even the bigger electoral shock, in my opinion, was actually the 2019 election. Did you hear about this?
Remind me.
Yeah, so this is what elevated Boris Johnson to becoming prime minister, where basically working class constituencies around the UK switched from Labour to the Conservatives.
Oh, that's right.
Um,
Yeah, there was a big sweep in the north of England.
Well, and that's not nothing because I mean, some of those constituencies had never voted Conservative. I mean, it's north of England, places like South Wales as well, and a lot of these places had even not voted for a Conservative for 100 years, or not voted for Conservative since the constituency existed. The constituency being the voting district, and the fact that the Conservatives won on an absolute landslide, and it was a very, very clear mandate. It was, we want you to get Brexit done, and we want you to reduce immigration. And they haven't done the opposite regarding getting Brexit done. Nominally, Brexit has happened, but they've increased immigration. It's like you've done the very thing that's going to get you out. You
Almost
know, you yeah,
almost like there's some people in the background behind the conservatives, behind
yeah,
whatever party in whatever country, who
yeah,
are setting the agenda and pulling the strings, who exist and are in control regardless of who we think we vote for,
yeah.
if I
Well,
might put
yeah,
my tinfoil hat on.
I don't think that just requires a regular baseball cap. That one. No, so that's it's becoming obvious that the democracy is a myth. If it was ever true, it's not true now. And I think a lot of British people at that point now is like, well, you're just going to do what you want to do now, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think we saw this too with the Dutch farmer protests, where
Yeah,
ostensibly it was about this requirement of reducing nitrogen to pursue nebulous climate goals, but when you dug
mm-hmm.
into the details, we come to find out that there are Dutch politicians who are basically trying to reclaim farmland from the farmers and use it to put up more apartment blocks to house yet more people from other parts of the world. And I remember meeting some people from the Netherlands when I was younger, when I was first starting to travel around. So 20 odd years ago, and I met this young lady from the Netherlands, and she said back then, like, we're the highest population density country in the
Yeah,
world. There's just no room. It's not a matter of
yeah,
like, we're not xenophobes or racist or whatever. There's just nowhere to put anybody.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the constraints of material reality don't appear to be a concern to our betters. And I think that also belies the sort of belief in transhumanism in a way, because like
Hmm.
they
Okay.
literally don't think that material reality means anything anymore, or that like there's any constraints. Like they just keep jamming people in, just keep
Yeah.
creating more consumers and
Yeah.
thinking it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
gonna.
Yeah.
They're thinking it's all gonna work out without any thought given to, again, the people that already live in these places,
Yeah.
how we're going to provide resources, infrastructure, jobs, meaning in the
Yeah.
future to all of the people that live there, and the sort of weird promises they're making to the people that move in from these other countries. Like if you're an immigrant, you have I guess a desire to improve yourself, and you think you are going to achieve that by moving to the UK or Canada or America
Mhm.
or wherever you're going. But the people making you the promises about what you're going to get upon arrival are never going to be able to deliver, because they're making these promises to everybody without a damn clue about how they're going to deliver on it.
Well, I think I've just done a piece about this, haven't I? I think basically not our civilization, but our elite, um, their regime died in 2008. I think the financial crisis, and I follow this a bit. I follow quite a few YouTubers who talk about the financial world, and obviously they're trying to shock by saying everything's going to collapse. But people make good cases of basically that our economy is not solvent. There's no way of paying all of the commitments, all of the debts, and all of the pensions, and all of these things. There's no way to pay for it in the current paradigm. It can't happen. The numbers simply do not add up, and I'm convinced, and this is just my personal. Is it just my personal view? There's quite a few others who are of the same mind. I'm convinced that what they want to do is they want to bring in a new moral case and a new economic case. And the economic case is basically fighting global warming, it used to be called global warming, wasn't it? Because all of these projects are really, really, really expensive. Each of those windmills, and we got now thousands and thousands of windmills across Europe, and they're putting them up all the time. Each one is $2.5 million or so each. So a few thousand of those, a few million of those, and that's several $1 trillion that someone's got to pay for, but that's money that is rotated through the system and keeps the bank solvent, basically. And if it keeps the bank solvent, keeps the system solvent, and it keeps the politicians
For now.
in whatever they. Well, for now, I genuinely think they are desperate, or some people are desperate. I think a lot of our politicians don't get it. They're too busy. They're performers. I mean, Boris Johnson, for example, take Boris Johnson as an example of a British politician, quite a good one. In that, I'd love to have a pint with him. Yeah, I think he'd be hilarious. I think it'd be really good fun. He's obviously quite clever in some regards, but he's a performer. The ability to recite ancient Greek, verbatim. He can quote the Iliad off the top of his head in ancient Greek on TV. Well, that's great, but that's we don't need performing monkeys. We need leaders, and he's not a leader. He's a performer, and they have to be performers. You ever seen the TV show The Thick of It from about 10 years ago or so? It's
No.
it's a it's a British. I'll find a few clips on YouTube at some point because it's hilarious. I'm sure you can cope with the swearing.
Yeah,
Um,
no,
but
I hear what you're saying about performers. I mean, I'm from Canada, and our prime minister literally at one point in his life was a drama teacher. Uh,
I,
how most politicians are.
I was expecting to hear the word Queen there. You teacher made me jump a bit. Oh, he's not going to say that. All right, okay. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no. He literally was a teacher, and he taught drama, like acting, right? And
Right, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
his only qualification. Like Justin Trudeau, you know how like most politicians, they used to be lawyers, or they were in industry, or they're they
Mm-hmm.
they had
Used to.
some maybe not quite useful, but at least some pedigree somewhere. Like Trudeau has none of that. The guy literally runs on his adoptive father's name,
Right.
and that's all he's got. And he's a drama teacher, so yeah, he fits what you're saying here perfectly. I know what you're saying.
And I think they don't have time. As you said before, they're not really in charge anyway. They're the performers who are like they're enacting the play in front of them. They're this distraction from what's going on. It's all theatre. Quite clearly, the British experience in the last 8 years or so is demonstrates that they have no interest in doing the conceit of democracy. The British people have spoken. They've taken up the taken the power that that's given them and done something completely different. So I'm becoming quite incoherent now, aren't I?
No, no, it's okay. But
Uh,
like I understand what you're saying, and I mean, you can obviously I see your frustration with this, and then everyone else's as well. Like you obviously do quite a bit of reading. I guess when you're at home not trucking, you're watching lots of YouTube intellectuals and the anons, so to speak.
yeah, that's how I waste my time these days. Yeah,
I quite liked your piece where you were riffing on academic agent.
yeah, yeah,
You're very well versed with Lord Yarvin, and
yes,
all of these guys are very popular and out there in the zeitgeist because, like you say, democracy is basically it's basically a sham, and
yes,
most thinking people realize this,
yes,
and we're looking for answers or looking for an alternative. Like you say, you guys voted for Brexit. They only sort of partially delivered on it and then went in the opposite direction with one of its main policy goals.
yep,
You've seen here in America where this manifested itself with Donald Trump, and the powers that be immediately got to work on removing that fellow by any means necessary. And now it's the sort of fight we're seeing with the Republican Party leading up to the 2024 election here in America is based primarily on that question, like, do you go back to the status quo and let the Mitch McConnells and the corporatist wing of the party run the show, or
yeah.
does it swing back towards Donald Trump and the folks that actually want democracy to deliver them something? And I mean, whatever you think of Trump or however much of a failed personage he might be, the man is not perfect. He has many faults, but like he's an avatar of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, certainly. If I was American, I would have voted for Trump
Yeah,
without that. If only to say screw you to the system. That's
exactly.
why. Yeah, that's what I'm pretty sure. That's why a lot of Americans voted for him. Maybe I should speak for Americans, but it did seem to me it was as much anti-Hillary as anything else, and I can
Oh yeah,
totally, from what I've seen, I totally get that.
yeah, no,
Um,
correct. And I mean, where that touches on what we do. I mean, again, you're a trucker, I'm a trucker, and we in our job are at the tender mercies of the bureaucratic state. A lot of if you're a working person in the world, a lot of regulation has transferred in the last 40 years under neoliberalism, globalization, whatever you want to call it, where capital and business have basically been let loose to do whatever it wants. And so now the government basically puts all of its regulatory power down onto us.
yep.
I've been reading a book called Sweatshops on Wheels by this
Oh
American
yeah.
former truck driver and now academic named Michael Belzer. And
Right.
one of the points he makes in his book, and something that I came to before I even read his book and a few other, just from experience in life, is that they deregulated the trucking business in 1980 in America, but they didn't really deregulate it. It was just a transfer of regulation from
Right.
trucking companies in their ability to open up, have authority for certain lanes, rates, the business behind the actual moving of goods. And then they transferred it down to the drivers
Yeah.
and the people doing operations. And so this, well, I get to the point here.
Yeah. That's right.
This quote unquote populist movement, the people around the world saying enough is enough. Like we're kind of on the bleeding edge of that because
Yeah.
people have seen that the government now doesn't do anything to regulate the capital class, corporations, any of that. They're just
Yeah.
bothering. They're just bothering us. They're micromanaging the people and not doing anything that we want. The media is standing around going, "What's the problem?" and basically ignoring anything that we have to say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they yes, I mean they really do want to ignore what everyone has to say. Corporatization is it's. Have you heard of James Burnham and the Managerial Revolution? That
Yes,
book.
I've heard of it. I've listened to and read many a review of it, but I haven't got around to reading it myself. I guess I should.
Yeah, I mean, if you can find Academic Agent's book, actually, he talks about Burnham and all of these other elite theory thinkers. So that's recommended as well, and it's quite short as well. When I heard of that, I heard of that course through Yarvin first of all, and we reading Yarvin's blog from years ago, and at first I was reading that going, "What the hell is this guy going on about? This doesn't make any sense." But then
Many such cases.
well, exactly. But then I kind of, but I found, I thought there must be something doesn't feel right. I back then I was pretty much BBC'd. I was pretty much, um, um,
As a former CBC Canadian, I feel your
uh,
pain.
yeah. Well, it's MSNBC and CNN in the US, isn't it? It's all of this kind of thing. The Cathedral, of course, and I read Yarvin and go, what is this guy on about? It's like the scales start falling from my eyes. The old red pill and blue pill thing, it's kind of a good analogy, but it's a bit too sudden. It wasn't like I swallowed a pill and suddenly my mind completely changed. It took years. Then, of course, Yarvin directs you towards other people like Burnham, and I haven't gone really deep and read people like Juvenal and Pareto and people like that. But I read about the managerial revolution. And it's like, yes, oh, that's what I can see. I can see that all around me. I can see that when I put my tachograph card in the machine. I can see that when they keep introducing more and more rules, do nothing. Nobody introduces a rule and goes, okay, we'll give it 6 months, see how it gets on. If it doesn't improve road safety, we take the rule away. They never do that.
No,
Um,
no, not at all. And I mean that's happened here with the introduction of the electronic logging
yeah,
device
yeah,
mandate, the ELD in America, which came into place in 2017 or 18. And there's
yeah,
been numerous studies, and it's not even a matter of studies. It's just looking at the crash statistics. So, line go up. They haven't fixed anything. But you're correct. It's not about fixing a problem. It's never about what the stated goals are. It's
yeah,
just we're doing something to make it look like we're doing
yeah,
something because the sort of managerial class, as it were, needs to be seen to be doing something, and they want to
yeah,
justify their jobs because
yeah,
actually working for a living or doing something productive is beneath them.
yeah,
And so they just micromanage the hell out of the rest of us. And there's never clawing back any of these rules. My uncle Chris taught me that when I was a young kid and starting to like think about politics and whatnot. And I don't know, we were talking about some proposed regulation. I can't remember what, but he said, Gordy, like it's really easy to write a law. It's almost impossible to get rid of it. He says once it's in there, it might as well be in
yeah.
stone. You know.
And their impulse to follow directives will carry on even when they don't have to. So as an example, it's a very small example, but that's just happened in the last few months in the UK. Now we're out of the European Union. The European Union have no mandate, no jurisdiction, whatever in the UK. Okay, the laws that the laws that the EU gave us are all still in place for the moment, as far as I know. There might be other fields what I don't know about, but as far as I'm aware, the EU laws are all still in place, including all of the driver's hours rules and all of the tachograph rules and all of this kind of thing. The EU just issued, I'll say this again because we're in Britain, we're outside the EU, nothing to do with them anymore in theory. The EU issued a document clarifying enforcement procedures about one small rule, and it wasn't, I won't bore you what it is. And our enforcement agency, the DVSA, are carrying out what they've been directed to do by the EU, even though we're not in it anymore, if that makes sense. So why? What you didn't have to, you didn't even need to listen to them. There was just noise from over there. You just completely ignore that. But the thing is, the bureaucrats, that's what they do. They bureaucrat.
Yeah, no,
Um,
well, good luck getting those people to put down the crack pipe, mate. Like it's it's an addiction. It's in their DNA. That reminds me of a story,
it's
if
in
I
their pay
may.
packet as well. It's in their
Yeah,
pension as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
I after I took my grandparents to Scotland in 2008, I carried on traveling a bit more on my own, and I went to Iceland.
Oh
Um,
wow. Okay. Cool.
yeah, I'd always wanted to go to Iceland. So I mean, from I got a flight from Glasgow to Reykjavik. It was the
Mhm.
wrong time of year. There used to be a ferry that went from the east coast of Iceland to the Faroe Islands, and then you could pick up
Oh,
another one down to Scotland or another one to Norway. But it was the wrong time of year. Anyway, I'm in Scotland, and no, sorry, I'm in Iceland, and sort of walked down to the port area to the port and industrial side of Reykjavik and
mhm.
rocked up to this little trucking company's office and just walked in the door and introduced myself. And everybody in Iceland speaks English.
Yeah.
So I get yapping with this fella, and he says, "Do you want to go for a ride with one of my drivers?" And so I meet this guy named Siggy, which is short for Sigurður. And anyway, he gave me a took me on a trip from Reykjavik
Oh wow.
to the next biggest town in Iceland, which is called Akureyri. So
Uh-huh.
I'm riding with him in his Scania, and we're as you do, as we are now, we're shooting the breeze about life and trucking and
Yeah.
everything under the sun. And he was telling me the same thing about Iceland and its membership in the European Union. And he's like, "So we're in Iceland. This truck is
Mhm.
never going to go to Europe ever. It's never going to get on a ferry and go over there ever.
Yeah.
This truck is here. I'm here. I'm never crossing anywhere into Europe.
No,
However,
no.
we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
on our membership in the EU, it's stipulated that all the truckers in Iceland must go by EU hours of
Yeah.
service rules, and they have electronic tachographs in their trucks just like everybody else in Europe, and their silly HOS rules." And he's like, who in the European Union am I going to possibly hurt if I get in an accident? What does somebody in Austria have to do with me hauling fish in Iceland? Like, the whole
Yeah.
thing was ridiculous, you know?
It is. I mean, it's. I can understand when people are crossing borders. So I'm going to play devil's advocate slightly now for the EU. I can understand where if people are crossing borders, you need to lead a framework where you know what the rules are going to be in the country you're going to. Yeah, Europe would be trucking in Europe would be chaotic if you had to abide by a new set of rules with each country you go into. Okay, so I can see that. The problem is they won't leave it alone. There will be a framework. Fine, there's a framework, but they're add to it. They're add to it constantly. I met a guy who went to the EU, actually physically went to the EU because he was a transport consultant and he was part of a British delegation to the EU Parliament. And he visited the departments who were making these rules. And he said he couldn't believe the number of people sitting there doing, well, you could work out what they were doing. They had very nice jobs. But of course, they legislate, therefore they are. You know, I think, therefore I am, but I legislate, therefore I am. That's their job is to sit there and think of new rules. Because if they don't, if they can't fold their arms at any point to say, oh, well, okay, well, we've done it. We've got to a level of road safety that we're not going to improve by more rules. We'd go down the pub. Um, they can't do that because then they'd be out of a job, and
Well,
those
I
jobs are
think
quite cushy.
do you think maybe some of this, again? I like to tie things back to transhumanism all the time. That's my
Okay,
little bugaboo. But like
right, okay,
one of the tenets of transhumanism is that, like, there's some point of perfection that they want to achieve with the human animal, through technology and or merging with technology. And
yeah,
I have to wonder if, like, the sort of bureaucratic imperative is feeding off that or somehow embedded in it, where they think like, well, all right, well, if we just keep making new rules and new regulations and all of this, that we will somehow make things perfect, when they
yes,
don't realize something that's like ancient wisdom is that humans are not perfect. I mean, this is sort of one of the roots of, Christianity is like we're not perfect people. We're fallen, and there's always going to be problems. And the only way you can solve it is to just manage it in the best way you can. But like attempting to achieve perfection is just folly.
I saw their film Wally. You remember that cartoon from a few years ago?
Oh yeah, with all there's some kind of like cruise ship or some
Yeah,
this cruise spaceship or something, and everyone's like 28 stone or something.
yeah. Where everyone's riding around in these on these little pods, only looking at screens, and everything's been run by robots. I think that's their wet dream. I think that's what they really, really want.
Yeah,
That
well,
they even they would rather have they want everyone else to be just as you say transhuman. The people in Wall-E are transhuman. They transcended humanity. Transcending humanity isn't necessarily going to go in a good direction. It's going to mean you're overweight and just look at a screen all day and live off milkshakes. I mean, a
yeah.
lot of people are transhuman already.
Oh yeah.
You look around and you can see people and go, yeah, human beings shouldn't be like that. That's
Yeah,
wrong.
well, the thumbnail image at the start of your recent piece there, I love these guys.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's not. That's not a fully realized human being, but that's the kind of human beings the people at the top like. He's a consumer. He's motivated enough to vote, but not intelligent enough to vote for not intelligent enough to think about how he's voting. He's angry, so he's going to vote for whoever he's going to vote against whoever he's angry about, and he's going to play games and buy clothes and hair dye and milkshakes. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
no, this is it, eh? Like this, transhuman consumptive society
yeah,
wall we are approaching at with very high speed is it's folly, man. People need meaning, and those of us that are, they want to dismiss us as being hopelessly traditional or reactionary or whatever. It's just a cope for the fact that, like, I think deep down some of those folks understand that, like, there's no meaning anywhere in any of that shit. I have two daughters. Man, I would hope that I did my job as a father properly in the future by them understanding this as well and developing in their developing of an appreciation for what meaning actually is and for what, like, the purpose of life, because it isn't just being a consumer, right?
yeah.
Anyways, onwards from all of this heady intellectual crap.
This
um
is heavy. Okay.
or pretense as such. You haul all around England, and
UK, so Scotland and Wales.
right, the UK, the island
It
of
used to be that England was synonymous with the UK, but now, I mean, put it this way: there's some pubs in South Wales that if you went in there and say, "Hey, this is really nice here in England," you may not come out again.
yeah, true, that's right. I should know better given my roots.
Yes, yeah,
Be
oh yeah, Mr.
be
McGill.
I should
Yes,
be I
sure.
should be much more specific. I
Yeah.
dated a
Sorry.
girl. I dated a girl from Nottingham for a little while.
Oh, you
Um,
lived through that as well.
yeah, well,
Sorry, that's just cheap.
We were in New Zealand. I lived in New
Oh,
Zealand
okay.
for a while, and I met her in Auckland, and we were an item for the better part of a year. We ended up splitting and going our separate ways. I think I broke her heart. She wanted me to come back and hang out with her in the UK, and
Okay.
I was at the time I could think of nothing except, get as far into the outback in Australia as I can. And I also
No.
didn't like the idea. I was sort of running low on money, and I didn't like the idea of like going to England and kind of like, sponging off of this woman. But in 2008, when I was over there, I went to visit her and we hung out for a bit. I mean, we're still friendly to this day. She no longer lives in Nottingham. She's in Wales,
Okay.
physical therapist, and she's helping her mother, who's get quite old. But anyway, those are my connections to England.
Yeah.
And you are driving around the island of England, Scotland, and Wales.
Yeah.
Remind myself and my audience. There's a name for that island,
Great Britain.
right?
Yeah. So the UK is the full name of my country is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Okay.
Right,
Great Britain is the island. The British Isles are all of the islands of the UK plus Ireland, the Republic
right,
of Ireland. Does that make sense? The Great Britain is the island of England, Scotland, and Wales. Does that make sense?
right. So that's the name of the actual physical island, not just the nation state.
Yep, that's my understanding. Yeah. So
Okay.
obviously that's it's largely synonymous. If you say Great Britain, everyone is going to know you mean the UK. But
Right.
I drive around Great Britain. I've spent far too long talking about that. It's really geeky. But okay.
That's all right. Well, no, I mean, like I say, I my plan in making this podcast, such as there is a plan, is to this is for my fellow truck drivers more than anyone else. So we might as well geek out about the trucking part of it for a while. Over here in America and Canada, truckers are always kind of making fun of the actual trucks in the UK because they're mostly cab overs and largely single axle drives, and they're a bit shorter and
Yeah.
somewhat pedestrian looking compared to some of the rigs here.
Well, I think so what you run at 80,000 pounds, it's in the US, yeah? 80,000 pounds, your trucks are usually about 70 foot long. But
Correct. That's the standard. That's the United States Interstate Highway standard
yeah,
that you can go from coast to coast anywhere in America with a tandem axle drive tractor and a
right.
tandem trailer is 80 grand. There are each state has its own peculiarities and allowances for intrastate work. Like so
Yeah.
I live in upstate New York. New York has these things called R permits, which allow you for undivisible loads to exceed the 80,000 pound standard. And those
Okay.
will apply, like you can pull a trailer with 3 axles or 4 axles and go up to like 117,000 pounds. I think that's mostly to do with the fact that we're up against Canada, and in Quebec and Ontario, you can have even crazier trailers with more
All right.
axles and more weight. So to allow
Oh,
for trade between Quebec and New York State, they have these like 4 axle trailers.
yeah.
And then, in Canada, we'll have B trains. In Australia, they
Yeah.
call them
Yeah.
B
Yeah.
doubles.
Yeah.
And then so New York State has a thruway, which is like a toll interstate highway that runs from just outside New York City, goes north, follows the Hudson River to Albany, and then it turns west and follows the old Erie Canal
Yeah.
right over to Buffalo, and then west of Buffalo to the border with Pennsylvania.
I'm saying
And
yeah, 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 but I've got a vague idea what you're talking about, but I
yeah,
don't
it's
know the detail. But
Interstate 90. So it's like
yeah,
like a 4 lane carriageway, motorway,
right.
whatever you would call it in England. And but because it's a toll road and it's kind of a quasi private public, it's not governed like a normal interstate. They allow what they call turnpike doubles. So you'll see
Right.
guys on the thruway pulling like 248 or 253-foot trailers,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
kind of
I've
like
seen
an
that in Spain actually. There's a few routes in Scandinavia. I think in parts of Russia as well. They got B trains. They can run up to 25 meters and 25 and a bit meters. So I'm not quite sure what that is in feet.
That's about
Um,
I think that's about 82 feet. It's the same in
yeah,
Canada. A Canadian,
yeah,
what we would call a super B in Canada, so a tractor and then a B train is
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's roughly 25 meters, which is 82 feet long.
Yeah, on some routes in Spain, they got full doubles. They got full double road trains, and that's only on specific routes, and it's for the produce because Spain's a big producer of produce, and they don't go out of Spain. They would just be running from the south up to Madrid or whatever. But here, yeah, we're the normal articulated lorry semi truck is limited to 16 and a half meters, which is about 54 feet. A low loader can be 18 meters. This is people want to really geek out about this. We can have what we call a wagon and dragon. I'm not sure what you'd call it there, but where you've got a straight truck or a rigid truck with a trailer, a proper trailer.
Yeah, like
That
over here, you might call it a truck and pop or a
yeah,
truck, or
okay,
I think in New Zealand they would refer to that as a truck and trailer. But yeah,
yeah,
you've got like a straight job. Over here we call rigids like a straight truck,
yeah.
and you'll have
Um,
you'll have a pintle hook out the back, and then
yeah,
another little trailer behind you. Yeah.
yeah. So those can run up to 18.75 meters. But they're not that popular because everybody likes the flexibility of having semi trailers, because you can drop and swap, and I'm swapping trailers all the time during my week. I'll never finish the week with the same trailer. I'll be swapping trailers, sometimes a couple of times a day, maybe more.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Um,
that here. A lot of the big freight companies here in America will do it as well, where you have drop and hook.
yeah, drop and swap we call it, but yeah, it's the same thing. So we can run up to 44 metric tons, which I think is about 96,000 pounds. So we're running shorter trucks. I think the width is the same. One thing about this unique about the UK is we can run tall. So we in Europe, there's most countries in Europe, certainly Holland and Germany, you can't have anything taller than 4 meters, which I think is like 13 foot one. We can run up to 5 meters, which is 16 and a half feet roughly, which is really tall. We've got the tallest trucks in the world. So we haven't got the longest, we've got the tallest. And they're quite tricky to drive, as you can imagine, because when they're fully freighted, you've got such a high center of gravity.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know how. I mean, I haul logs, which are also a high center of gravity. Not because they're necessarily stacked any higher than a normal trailer, but it's just a lot of weight.
yeah.
So I remember when I first started meeting drivers from the UK, because a lot of truckers from the UK have immigrated to Canada.
Yeah.
Especially out west, there was like a provincial program with Alberta and Saskatchewan where they were trying to get drivers over there, and over
The,
the last
the
20
last time,
years.
yeah,
Go
the
ahead.
last time I saw an ad was New Brunswick. New Brunswick had a visa scheme for. I came. I was very, very, very close to applying. It was very tempting, but my mum's sick, and I want to be around
Yeah, no, I hear you. The UK guys would
here.
tell me about this particular type of trailer that you guys have over there called a tilt.
Oh, yeah, very not that common these days, though. That
Yeah,
the
well, it sounded like they were a right pain in the ass. Can you describe for us what a tilt is?
Oh my God, well, it's kind of I've never driven with one. Yeah, so basically, oh goodness me, you got a flatbed with outside. Can you imagine? Yeah, and then basically you got a frame over the top with a tarp with a tailored. That's one way of describing it. Tarp, which is slung over the top of that. I've never, fortunately, never had to deal with one of those things, but yeah, apparently they're a right pain in the ass. You virtually never see them as well. Occasionally, you see something like a Turkish registered truck with a tilt on it.
Okay, so it sounds a little bit like
Curtain
in the
sliders.
yeah, it sounds a little bit like a curtain sider, or what the Americans would call a covered wagon.
Yeah,
But American covered wagons, I mean, I've pulled them before. They weren't that much. I mean, they were a little bit of a pain, but not that much. Like the sides,
right.
they sort of collapsed fairly easily. But I remember the English guys telling me that like a tilt would take you hours to put together.
Yeah, I can imagine. No, like I say, I've never had experience with one. Um, we use curtain siders. That's by far the most popular thing here. Boxes aren't really that popular. Obviously, there's fridges, but we don't tend to go for boxes with vans. Sorry, we love our curtain siders, especially in the UK.
Yeah, I recall some videos when the migrant crisis was really hitting the Europe hard, and there was a big encampment in Calais in France. And
Yeah,
some of the gentlemen in Calais would take knives to the curtain siders and try and jump in the side of the trailer while you were queuing up to get in the tunnel or board the ferry.
doctors and engineers. That's what
um,
the BBC call them. They're literally truck drivers will call them doctors. Oh,
right,
there's a lot of doctors around Calais today. It's so terrible.
right.
Anyway,
So, can you describe for me? So, you're coming from the continent. You're coming from
yep,
Europe, and you're in France, and
yep.
so correct me if I'm wrong. The entrance to the channel is in Calais, correct?
Yeah, so you basically got four main ways of getting from the continent into the UK. Five if you count the ports in Spain, but that's much less frequent because they're much slower. You know, they overtake the day. So you've got the port at Caen, which goes up to Portsmouth, and that's an overnight ferry. But much more popular is the tunnel and the ports at Calais and Dunkirk, both of which go into the port of Dover in the UK. Now, the port of Dover is a choke point because it's a small town at the bottom of the cliff, and it's actually quite amazing the amount of trucks they can put through it, trucks and cars, because it's one of the absolute main way into the UK. You want to know what it's like to deal with the migrants as they
Well,
try
or
to reach us?
just like what does it look like when you come into Calais?
It,
Like
yeah,
how many motorways come into Calais?
yeah. You've got
I'm just trying to visualize. Like I'm driving down the highway in
yeah.
France. I get to Calais, and you have all these different options. But like, are there big, huge backups of trucks? Like I've seen videos of like lineups, and I'm assuming
Yeah,
that's to get into the tunnel. Like you probably have to pay a toll. Is there customs? Like how does all that work?
yeah, sure. Oh God. Right. So um, on the British side, it's quite simple. The tunnel and the port are all roughly in the same place, so just a few minutes from each other. That's where the big queues happen. Actually, is on the British side, people trying to get out, and so because there's only really two roads, and they all funnel into the same small town. Like I said, you actually drive through the town centre basically to get onto the port of Dover.
Really?
Yeah. It's amazing they keep it running so smoothly. To be honest, I mean there has been massive queues. You can wait a day, and not just because of Brexit or customs problems, but because if there's bad weather, there's quite often bad weather in the channel, and that will slow down the ferry companies. And then people go, oh, okay, we're not going to use the ferry, we use a tunnel, and that backs up then. So you can have massive queues. The Kent police have got a system in place for basically they will stack. They call it Operation Stack, where they will park the trucks up on the M2 motorway and the M20. Right. On the French side, it's flat, so there's a lot more. And you've got two ports instead of one, of course. There's a lot more space to queue up. I mean, Dunkirk is actually you can actually park overnight on the port, which is quite good because that's secure. There's a few big truck stops. That video that's on my YouTube channel, that was like I say, that was at Transmark, which is a large area of some very large truck stops, diesel pumps, workshops and freight forwarding companies and so on. Transmark. You've got major motorways feeding in from that. So you've got the A16 motor autoroute, which runs past it, past both Calais and Dunkirk. And if you go north, you get into Belgium within an hour or so. So it's very close to the Belgian border. And you come up from the southwest along there, and there's two other auto routes that come up from the south.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
how far is Calais, let's say, from Paris?
Oh, not long at all. You can do it in a day. It's not far at all. You can do UK to Paris in a day quite easily.
And
It's
well, a day has a different meaning between Canada and America and Europe because, like here, ELDs notwithstanding, back in the day, you put 900 miles or 1,000 miles in one day.
right. Well, you never we've got speed limiters here, so we'd never do that even if you wanted to. I think 800 kilometers is basically the maximum we'd be able to do in our hours with the speed limiter. So it's about 500 miles, isn't it? Yeah, but Paris is well within that. Yeah, so if you really want to go to Paris, we always avoid Paris unless you really have to go there. But
Right. So
um,
I think I remember you in one of I don't know if it was in your writing or somebody else in England
uh-huh.
about part of route planning, being a truck driver, you kind of like you're supposed to have a little bit of leeway in choosing your own routes and whatnot. And I thought I read somewhere that like you book your own ferry crossings, you select how you're going to get off of England and over to
Yeah,
the mainland. Like that's all up to you. You're not told that by your dispatch.
depends who you're working for. But the companies I work for, so I work for two different companies on international, and they both had accounts. The first one, well, I think they both had accounts with the tunnel and the ferries. And there's three ferry companies that work out of Dover. So the last company I worked for, they had an account with one of the ferry companies, and you just rock up. You just get there in the queue and get whatever ferry you can get. You don't have to book it. You just go. Coming back in, that changed slightly with the slight difference in Brexit rules because you had to use one of the ports. It used to be that you could choose between Dunkirk or Calais. And quite often, so you're coming in from Belgium and you look at the ferry times and go, okay, I'm better off going Dunkirk or carrying on a bit further and going through Calais. With the new customs forms coming into the UK, they had to put which port, which route was taken. So now you've got to use one. But it's all on account. So you just rock up. It's us. The guys at the booths or at the ferry terminal. They know our trucks. They know who we are. It's just what have you got on silicon? Right, where you going? You're on. So it's like I say, considering the the potential restriction is actually pretty smooth, certainly on the British side. And you've got to understand it. You've got thousands of movements through this in a day.
Oh
So
yeah.
you know,
Well, when
um,
you mentioned that you had these two routes that brought you into Dover, and everyone's driving right through the center of town. That reminds
yeah,
me of you'll remember from the news, from the Freedom Convoy in Canada, how there was a
yeah,
blockade at what they call the Ambassador Bridge.
right, yeah,
So
remember, yeah,
yeah, so a little geography lesson. Southern Ontario, which is where the large bulk of where Canadian people live, near the city of Toronto and Ottawa and whatnot.
yeah,
It's basically the border is delineated by the Great Lakes, and
yeah,
all of the lakes kind of like flow east from Lake Superior all into each other, and in between the lakes, there's these big rivers. So there's a lot of bridges,
yeah,
and the Ambassador Bridge crosses the river between Ontario and Michigan. And on the Canadian side, there's a town called Windsor, and the other side is Detroit. And the Highway 401, the main motorway that runs the whole length of southern Ontario along the lakes and then the St. Lawrence River going into Quebec, that
okay,
highway ends about 5 miles from the bridge, and then
right,
you it becomes provincial highway 3, and then
yeah,
it's all traffic lights. It's 6 lanes wide, 3 in either direction.
yeah,
But I can't remember. There's some ridiculous amount of traffic lights. You have to go through like 30 odd sets of traffic lights over 4 or 5 miles to get to the bridge, and you're going right through Windsor, and it's literally tens of thousands of trucks
yeah,
day in,
yeah,
day out, 24/7. And it's been
yeah.
driving the city of Windsor bananas because it's been like that forever, you know?
Well, what they do in Dover is you've got the hill that comes down from the because you've heard of the White Cliffs of Dover. I don't know
Oh
if you.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen photos. Yep.
yeah. So that's where the port of Dover is, at the bottom of those cliffs, basically. And so you come down the hill off the A2, and if the volume of traffic is high, they will queue the trucks up on the hill. So that instead of having you queue up in the town, they keep the town clear all of the time. It takes a lot of manpower. The Kent police basically have people on this all the time. And they queue the trucks up on the hill, and then the police will let trucks through and get them onto the port. So then you can queue on the port to avoid clogging the town up. So I don't think the people of Dover, which is quite a rough little town, but it's a pretty place. I don't think they mind too much the number of trucks coming through. And when I say through the town centre, it's not like right through the middle of the shopping centre. See what I mean? It's on the road that runs along the seafront. It seems to work okay, but it is a choke point. It backs up very, very quickly if something goes wrong. That's what
Right.
they were afraid of. That's what they were afraid of over Brexit. They thought basically the county of Kent was going to become a truck park, which is it's, it's extraordinary how people think they know things. Um, isn't it? I mean, everybody thought, oh, it's going to become a truck park. Well, hold on a sec. Now let's think this through. We've got a trade imbalance in the UK. We import far more than we export. Okay, so you've got a lot of loaded trucks coming into the country, and you've got more empty. You do have empty trucks leaving the UK because they can't find loads. This is one reason why Britain has, for the most part, lost its international trucking business. You know, there's only a few firms that still do international work, as in going to the continent, because you've got all of these Polish and Hungarian trucks arriving in the UK with loads from Germany or France or wherever. And of course, well, you know how it works. Then they want to get a backload. Well, they do it for nothing. They do it for the price of a ferry crossing or the diesel, just to cover their cost.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so you've got outbound loads from the UK. So that really took the wind out of the international trucking industry in the UK. And I think about roughly the same has happened in Germany and Holland as well.
So that
It still exists. Yeah.
yeah. So speaking of, doing it for nothing, how do drivers in the UK typically get paid?
Typically, we're on an hourly rate, and it's different companies do different things. You know, the company I work for, I'll get a fixed hourly rate up to 9 hours, I think, and then I'll get a small overtime bonus on top of that. But on the overtime hourly rate, I get paid a little bit more for Saturday and more again for Sunday, and we get allowances. So for being parked out in the truck, so they give us a tax. You get a tax-free allowance. It's like £25 for being out overnight. That's how we get paid. Some companies are on a day rate. The guys doing international work are usually on a day rate, because because the companies don't want to pay for drivers just sat in the queue at Dover on an hourly rate, as you can imagine. But the company I work for were quite unusual, that they would pay a day rate and a small bonus according to your gross earnings, which upset a lot of drivers because they could never work it out, because of course all customers pay a different amount. I wasn't unhappy with it. It was enough that you could be a bit more relaxed. You know, if you did get delayed at the port or wherever, you could chill. You knew you were going to get something or something decent, and then if you worked a bit harder, you get a bit of extra pay. And I think
Yeah,
that's,
one of the things, like in my mind's eye, and
yeah,
again, this is totally ignorant on my part because I haven't spent much time over there. But I can't imagine. I always thought that if I was ever trucking in Europe, it would be what American drivers like to call a clusterfuck.
right,
Just because
why,
you'd be stuck in traffic in London, and then stuck in traffic at Dover, and stuck in traffic in Paris, and stuck in traffic in Brussels, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
basically you would just be in traffic everywhere because Europe is like so much more densely populated than
yep, yep,
most of what America and Canada is. And like we have these troubles here, any major metropolitan area, trying to get around, say, New Jersey, New York City, on and
yeah,
off Long Island, or going through Chicago or anywhere in Southern California. Like, forget it. But like
yeah,
once you're out of those areas, it's pretty smooth sailing for the most part.
yeah.
You know?
It can be in parts of Europe as well, and you know, I'm well done for correctly identifying some of the worst traffic in the world. Your list there was spot on. You could have added Birmingham area in the UK as well, what they call the Birmingham box, which is three motorways: the M5, the M6, and the M42. They're actually worse than London, but anyway.
Is that
Um,
isn't there some place in Birmingham called Spaghetti Junction?
oh yeah, that's the junction of the M6 and the A38 motorway and a collection of minor roads where well, yeah, if you look at a map of it, it looks like spaghetti. It's like, actually, when you're in it, it's quite well signposted, and you can get around it. Okay, you just follow the signs. It's actually quite narrow as well. It was made years and years and years ago. I think in the 50s. No, that can't be right. But it was made a long time ago, and some of the lanes are a bit narrow. But there's a few places like that. There's a few junctions. There's probably a few like that in the US as well, isn't
Man, I'm trying to
there?
remember. The first one that came to mind is actually not one that many trucks would go through. It's called Confusion Corner in Winnipeg, out in Manitoba,
Right. Okay.
where it's kind of like an extended large traffic circle with kind of roads going hither and thither and yon, sort of somewhere
Right.
near in sort not quite downtown Winnipeg, but close enough.
Uh-huh.
But I guess, like I was saying, the my, you know, I could, in theory, if I wasn't married with children, I'm a dual citizen with Ireland.
Oh, okay.
Because my dad's father immigrated to Canada from Ireland, so I did the whole, ancestry and worked out the. My aunt figured out how to do all this with the paperwork, so I
Yeah.
obtained Irish citizenship. So,
Yep.
I mean, I remember when I was in when I was traveling over there in 2008, I went to my aunt had left Canada and moved to Dublin, and she lived in Dublin for quite a while. And
Yep.
I went to visit her and had a little nosy around that part of Ireland.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I gave it half a second of thought to becoming a truck driver in Ireland.
Oh,
And
you should
I
have done it.
I remember I think I went to whatever the Irish equivalent to the DMV is to
Right.
try and work out what I would have to do to get my license switched over.
Yeah.
And I think I would have had to. It seemed a little bit onerous, given that,
Right.
like, at that point I had, a Canadian class one or class A in Ontario, and then I
Mhm.
also had a license from New Zealand. And
Yeah.
I don't think the Irish authorities would have given that any weight. There was some issue where I think I
No.
wouldn't have been able to convert
No.
it easily. And I thought, oh, nah, bugger that. If they're not just going to let me
Definitely.
drive, then to hell with them.
Yeah. I don't think North American license are recognised um, anywhere in Europe. Um, the Irish trucking industry is quite large. I think I might be right in saying that the Irish industry is to the UK and Europe what the Canadian trucking industry is to the United States.
All right, in what way?
Well, I might be wrong, but obviously Ireland's quite small and it's not that massive of an economy. But they're close to the UK, which is got a bigger population and a bigger economy. So if a truck comes into the UK, it then becomes available for load going anywhere. So you've got quite a lot of international trucking companies who work out of Ireland, and they'll be around Ireland, and then they come into the UK on the ferries, and then they'll pick up another load going into Europe, if that makes sense.
Right.
And yeah, so the industry's I'm trying to say the industry's kind of there's more trucks per capita in Ireland because of that, if that makes sense.
Right.
Because they're
And
picking up international work when they come to the UK, which they do a lot.
right.
Um,
And that's
and
all ferry based. There's no tunnel between Ireland and Great Britain.
no, they all come over on the ferry into Liverpool, places like that. I think I've never, it's a weird thing. I've never been all over Europe, but I've never been to Ireland. Um, but
It's just
British
right
is
there,
quite.
mate. It's
Yeah,
just
I know, I know, I know, I know, I know. It's just, I should basically one weekend I should just go over and jump an easy jet and go to Dublin or something and experience it because I've been everywhere else. But and British drivers, there are British drivers, English drivers who are working for Irish companies. There was a YouTuber, one of the first like trucking YouTubers in Europe was a British guy, English guy who was working out of a company in Dublin and going all over Europe. So it does happen. Even though we're outside the EU, there's an arrangement between Ireland and Britain, I think, whereby you don't need visas to work.
right. Yeah.
Um,
So I think the Kiwis and the Australians have the same thing.
yeah, yeah,
They if you're a New Zealand citizen, you have living and work rights in Australia and vice versa. But usually that relationship only goes in one direction. Kiwis go and live in Australia.
yeah. I've heard that. Yeah,
There's a very small number of Australians returning the favor just because New Zealand's economy is smaller and their wage
yeah.
structure is smaller. So there's quite a few Kiwis living in Oz.
I New Zealand sounds very very tempting. I've actually sent CVs to some companies in New Zealand, and I was talking. I just I'm a fairly adventurous kind of guy, and I like exploring different things. And I've got a brother who lives in Auckland and some friends who live in Christchurch, so it's not like I've got no connection. And the idea of driving in a country which is basically all Scotland it seems.
Yes,
You know,
it's very hilly. The terrain is pretty interesting. I remember when I was a young guy, I went to New Zealand when I was 23 years old. And
okay.
at that time, I'd already been trucking for 5 years because I started straight away. I got my license as soon as
Oh,
I turned 18. Very itchy feet. And, went to Australia when I was 20, went to New Zealand when I was 23. But anyway, I'm in New Zealand and I had to relearn how to drive because you can be a trucker in America or Canada, and theoretically, you can never you can have a career here and never do anything but drive around on interstate 4-lane highways and
wow.
just
Okay.
be sat on cruise control all the time and not
Yeah,
really have to, employ, you don't have to get the most out of the truck.
yeah,
Whereas in New Zealand, there's a couple of motorways around Auckland, and one or two coming into Wellington, and a sort of a motorway that goes around Christchurch a little bit. But like,
yeah,
it's all 2-lane, narrow, twisty,
yeah,
windy, hilly roads. You're going up and down hills all the time, 25, 30K corners.
yeah,
The weather's terrible, and it's just a different. I had to relearn how to drive because
yeah,
you're
yeah,
just constant. You have to get the most performance out of the truck. You're always shifting. You're always on the engine brake, or whatever
yeah,
retarder system you have, and it's just far more technical driving, and it's a totally different skill set
yeah,
than
yeah,
just getting on a motorway and setting the cruise control here.
yeah, yeah. I get you, but I like the appeal of that. That sounds good. I mean, we
Yeah,
did. It's a bit like that here sometimes. I mean, you drive across Wales. I mean, if you're coming from like the 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 western side of South Wales and you're heading towards the Midlands, you could drive up through the middle of Wales and you're going to be like that all the time. You're gonna spend the entire day. Well, not rowing the gears because all of our trucks are automatics now, but you're going to be close to everything and making it work for a living.
well,
Um,
one of the things I learned while I was in New Zealand is the Kiwis, they'll give anything a go, as they say. And because they have this long tradition of being the furthest outpost of the empire,
yeah,
it was very difficult to get equipment, and so
right,
they had to be quite ingenious with what they had. But that
yeah,
also sort of lent them towards buying whatever they could get their hands on.
yeah,
So the New Zealand truck market, so to speak, like you'll get Aussie built Kenworths.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, I've
um,
seen, yeah, yeah,
you'll have what used to be Canadian built Western Stars. Then you'll have DAFs and Fodens,
yeah, yeah,
Volvos, Scanias, Mitsubishis.
yeah,
You'll have trucks there from, like I say, South Korea, Japan,
yeah.
Germany, England. You just have all these different makes.
Yes,
And
yes,
so when I was trucking there, I had to learn how to deal with all these European trucks and the European transmissions. So,
right,
like, if you've ever driven a Scania, they'll have like, it's almost like a joystick with this collar on
yeah.
it, and it's got like a 12 speed. And I had no effing idea what I was doing when I was down there. I
And
had
of
to
course,
re,
you're
I had,
driving on the other side as well.
yeah,
You're driving the
I
other
had,
side.
like I say, when I say I had to relearn how to drive, it wasn't just because of the roads. It
Yeah,
was because of all the different equipment there.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
America, think of it what you will, but like before they started bringing automatic transmissions here, like basically everybody had like a some version of an Eaton transmission, which would be like
Yeah, yeah,
an 8, 9, 10, 13, or 18 speed. That was basically it, right?
right.
There was no ZF boxes, no Scania pogo stick, whatever the fuck you call them, you know. And then I mean, DAFs and Fodens would have another different transmission, like the variety of transmissions that
Yeah,
would
yeah,
come with those European and Japanese trucks would they made my head spin. Every time I got in a different truck, I had to relearn how to drive.
yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah. The first time I drove a manual was I was doing agency work, and I'd only just passed what we call our class one, which is semi truck. Um, and I went to pick up this unit, and sort of sitting it, reached my left hand, down for the gear stick. And there's nothing there, and they didn't tell me anything. So, oh, here's the keys to the truck. It's outside. It's like, Well, now what? I don't even know what to do. Um, then,
Yeah.
oh, what's this little dial here do? Click. Oh, that's a gear, right? Drive. I'll get it. Okay.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
a lot of the dashboards on these European make
yeah.
trucks, they just have all these little symbols,
Yes.
and
Well, because they're designed for all these different languages of
right.
Europe.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so which one of these is the differential lock if I'm gonna get
Yeah. Yeah.
stuck
Yeah.
somewhere? You know,
Yeah.
where's the light switch? Where like I couldn't, I had to have people show me every time I'd get in a new truck because like my I was 23 and still fairly
Yeah.
inexperienced, and B, I was just used to American trucks, like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was interesting. Another thing again about getting back to New Zealand, you know how there's hierarchies in any social organization and in
Okay.
any field of endeavor. To my mind, Kiwi logging truck drivers are probably by their nature, are probably the most skilled operators of trucks in the
Right.
world. I
Right.
reckon
Right.
they have to get the most
Okay.
out of their equipment. It's the
Yeah.
most technical type of driving. I mean
Yeah.
that might get matched by like say logging truckers in the west coast of Canada, guys in BC
Yeah.
or
Sure.
down in Oregon or something like that.
Yeah.
But they're, to my mind, the best truckers in the world are New
Right.
Zealand logging guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And like I
It's
say, I don't know, other that you mentioned that your mother's in ill health. I don't know what else is might keep you in the UK, but if you're somewhat footloose and fancy free at some point in your life, yeah, I would heartily recommend New Zealand to anybody. I mean,
yeah.
never mind the trucking, but just it's just such a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
My brother's having a good. I mean, he's lived there for 10 years now. Loves it. Wouldn't he'd never ever come back. He's an engineer. He's not a driver. It does look attractive, I must say. At the moment, my personal thing is I I'm a bit where
Jacinda Ardern
what
notwithstanding.
is that? Yeah, well, we've all got our own version of her, basically. Where do they make these things? They're all the same. You're Trudeau, mind you. Biden's like old school, monster from the neoliberal past, isn't he? But our current lot. I mean, our current prime minister. I barely remember his name. Some short Asian guy, but he's there. He's just the same as the others. They make the same noises with their mouth.
Yeah, well, I
I
mean,
mean,
this
if you
is
if you were to record Sunak and Trudeau and just record their voice and kind of mask it slightly and then play it back along with back to back with Trudeau, and I wonder if anybody could tell the difference.
there's a certain vernacular that comes with the proponents and disciples of the new cathedral of global homogeneity, and yeah, they're all, well, this is it. This is what they're trying to do, is have everybody, they're always thinking about problems from a quote unquote global perspective now, and they all sound the same. They're all trying to
Yeah,
make the cars look the same. The architecture is all the same. The aesthetics is all the same. Everything is globalized beige
yep,
mush. And
yep, yep,
thus,
yep.
a factory in Davos where Klaus Schwab just clones all of these fucking people.
I
And
know.
for whatever reason, they have purchase with a certain part of the voting public who I'll never be able to wrap my
Well,
head
not
around it.
ours. Well, not we didn't vote for our last two prime ministers. We said nobody's voted. I don't think Sunak would have won any election. Not
Oh
for
yeah,
anybody.
because that would have been within the Tory party. That wouldn't have been put to the
Yeah.
voters. That would have,
No,
yeah.
no, no, no. The last two prime ministers we basically had imposed on us, and I mean Theresa May. Oh no, she wasn't. Sorry. We voted for Boris Johnson for our sins, and got Sunak. They
Yeah,
got
well,
the
I
best.
mean, Justin Trudeau. So you're in England, so you have you're under the same parliamentary system as Canada, the
Yeah.
OG, the OG version. Under the parliamentary system, the prime minister has the privilege of calling an election basically whenever they feel like it, as long as it's done within a certain minimum number of years.
Yeah.
And so Trudeau called an election in 2021 after there had already been an election in 2019. because he was trying to consolidate his power because he was in a minority parliament. So he only had his party, the Liberal Party of Canada, only had so many seats, and they were sort of governing in a coalition with the NDP, who were once considered the Workers' Party of Canada, but are now. I mean, so he calls this election in 2021, and it didn't move the needle really at all. And
Right.
only 58% of eligible voters took part in the election,
Really.
and his party only got 32% of that small percentage of voters. Canada's being run by a guy who got less than a third of the vote of less than two-thirds of the population, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
again, some democracy we have here, eh?
Yeah. It's kind of always been like that. I mean, people. I remember back when Thatcher was in charge. It's ironic that the last prime minister we had with Balls was Thatcher. But anyway, when she was there, the left were always complaining. Well, she didn't get that many votes as a total proportion. So they will use that argument when it suits them. I don't know
Right,
where it's going to go, Gord. We don't need democracy. We need some kind of leadership. I think when I think we're approaching a financial crisis, this is one reason I'm wary of just jumping to exploring New Zealand, going to work there, because I think we are coming up to a crunch point,
right.
probably early next year, and it's probably a good idea to be getting some stability,
Right.
and a job. Yeah,
I feel somewhat the same way. I'm in a little bit of stasis here because I have no idea what's going to happen with the wider economy. And
mm,
I mean, over and above having a family, wife and children here, there's just a lot of decisions about what to do in the medium to long term future
yeah.
that I've put off making because I have no idea what's going to happen.
I don't know about you, but when you're a driver, you can see what's happening in the economy to some extent. I mean, you can't see the wood for the trees, but you can see the trees. I don't know what it's like over there, but things matter right now at work, in the industry. We're coming out to Christmas, and we should be flat out. And throughout the last 12 months to 2 years or so, that I was always getting job offers and so on and things like that, on a regular basis. Now I'm getting none, and I'm hearing from other drivers. I'm hearing from other drivers that if they're on agency work, they can't get work, and the roads seem quieter, and my planners seem to be struggling to find work for us.
Yeah,
Um,
we're getting some of the same thing here. I was speaking with my friend Jamie a couple of weeks ago, and he's an owner driver, and he has a small fleet. I think he's got 9 or 10 trucks.
right.
Normally, there's a slow period, regardless of what's happening in the wider economy. Typically, it gets slow in January and the early parts of
Yes.
February here, right
Yeah.
after Christmas.
Exactly the same way. Yeah. Yeah.
And he's saying that like it's slower than what it would be in January, but this
Yeah.
should be the busy season right before Christmas.
Yeah. Quite.
So
Yeah.
yeah, we're seeing the same thing here, and as you mentioned before, things have been weird since 2008, and
Yeah.
I think we haven't had a reckoning for 2008 yet. They just keep printing more money and
Yeah.
trying to punt the ball, so to speak. I'm not an economist by any stretch of the word, but like the reckoning that has to take place with the 2008 financial crisis
Yeah.
and then the bailouts, they just keep pushing the ball down the road, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it. And we've had this crazy diesel price issue here in America and Canada, and
Yeah.
all the stuff that's flowed from COVID. That, oh man, the reckoning that we have to have with that's a whole nother conversation.
No.
I'm not quite sure what to do. I'm a man of pretty modest means, but I've thought about starting to try and save for the kids and whatnot. But
Yeah.
like, how do you
Yeah.
trust anything? You can't
Yeah.
trust the economy. You can't trust the stock market. A lot of people are trying to put faith in crypto, but then like every
Yeah.
actor
No.
in the crypto market or at least every other one of them seems to be a scammer. We had this FTX thing happen here
Yeah,
recently.
yeah, yeah,
So it's like, over and above like our loss of trust in institutions and
yeah.
governments, what do you trust in the economy? There's just like nothing seems to work properly, and there's more questions than answers.
I well, I've said what I thought that I think our the regime failed in 2008 and it's on life support. And I think the best thing is to be as stable as you possibly can in any particular way. So, put it this way, I love. I'm from London. I'm from South London. I wouldn't live anywhere near London right now because I up here in rural Norfolk, it can get by if everything collapses. If things collapse in London, the most scary creature is going to be other human beings.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's pretty scary right now, to be frank. I mean, and what I've been doing with my life for the last 4 years or so is, as far as I can, become stable in various different ways. So the things I buy, the things whether I get in debt or not, I've tried hard to get rid of as many commitments as possible, if that makes sense, and not be overcommit. I see these people who are spending 6 years to buy a new Audi, and you know you don't know what's going to happen in 6 years, and you need to get to work. And if you had to hand that car back, yeah, you could hand the car back, but then how are you going to get to work? So buy an old car and have it paid for and have everything paid for. Because you don't know what's going to happen. Not because that's a good investment, that's a good way of being, a good way of making money. It's just a good way of coping whatever's coming down the pipe, which I
Right. And
think.
it's funny, is there's more than a few people who understand this. You know,
Yeah,
own as much
yeah,
of your own stuff as you can. Don't be in debt. Don't
yeah,
be overly financially committed to anything. But again, the powers that be would like you to go in the opposite direction. You'll own nothing and you'll be
yeah,
happy,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. But that's what I'm saying. This is what they want. This is they are desperate to shore this system up because it's the system that gives them power. Okay. Without this system, people like Trudeau and Sunak, well, they could probably escape to the Cayman Islands. And to be frank, I think that's probably the best solution. I think there should be an amnesty for these guys at some point and say, okay, we're not going to stick your heads on spikes. We're going to let you get away. I'm serious. I know that sounds funny,
No,
but
no,
this,
it's Yarvin's rage suggestion, right?
yeah,
Retire all government employees and make sure they have a nice pension, and
yeah.
let them go and start over again with something else.
But whatever is coming down the pipe, we've got everything we need. I mean, when I say we, I mean ordinary people, the people in our countries have got enough to survive. We've got the trucks, we've got the warehouses, we've got the well, we haven't got the factories so much, but we've got the farms. Like people in New Zealand, we can keep going, despite the fact that the things. I mean, if you looked at the situation in New Zealand and compared to the UK, you could say, well, they've collapsed because they're at the far end of the supply chain. No, 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 they haven't because they're set up for it and they can cope with it. They can deal with it.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
well, I don't think we're here in the UK. I don't think we're in a position to deal with it. So that's what I'd be. I think that's our best plan. Is be resilient. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You know, yeah,
Yeah.
and in your case, buy ammo because I can't do that. um,
Right.
uh,
So, any parting thoughts? My wife is getting on me here to wrap this up, and we have been going for quite a while here.
yeah, sure.
We're
Any
pushing two and a
passing
half
thoughts?
hours.
Um, Passing thoughts. Just stay safe, man. And I think we've got the. I think we've got probably one of the most resilient jobs out there. The only one more resilient I can think of right now is farmer. I'd love to be a
Well,
farmer. I can't do it.
yeah. Well,
Um,
your one article there in response to academic agent, as to the pill analogies, yeah, there's a lot of white pill there because regardless of how messed up things get, material reality stays the same no matter how much they're trying to transit.
yeah,
and rest well in that knowledge that there's some of us who are always going to be necessary,
yeah,
and lean into that, so to speak.
yeah, yeah.
All
Yeah.
right,
So that,
and keep writing. I really appreciate your writing. I think it's
yeah.
I'm jealous of it. Like
Why? Oh, you
you.
write as well.
Well, I know, but mine's mostly just ranting and opining. Like you've got some.
Yeah, I've got some rants inside me. Trust me.
Yeah, but
Um,
there's a you certainly have a voice, Graham, and I really dig it, and I would encourage anybody that's listening to this to subscribe to your Substack, the Lorryist
yep.
substack.com. That's right.
Yeah. I'm at Highway My Way, as in high, as in hello, on Twitter as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
Do you have any like other writing projects in mind that you've got coming up?
none of my writing is ever a project. I just sit there and go, "Oh, I'm thinking about some stuff," and end up putting it down. I don't publish half the stuff I think about.
Right.
Write
Do
it
do
down.
you do you write when you're on the road, like when you're parked up at night?
Sometimes, usually when I'm on my days off. The shift pattern I'm working at the moment gives me a bit of time at home, so it's more productive than just listening to stuff. And I've been on this track since 2018 when my marriage fell through. I basically set myself the project of learning at that point, knowing that I was going to go back driving because I wasn't driving before 2018. And knowing I was going to be driving, I can listen to audiobooks and I can catch up because I've spent a lot of time listening to people who have read this and listened, understood that. And it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to spend the next few years of my life working and learning. And now I'm kind of got to the point where I can't stop now talking about some of the stuff I've learned, So you say writing projects, it just makes me laugh because none of my writing is ever a project. It's just like I just want to get this all out. I just want to pump
Yeah,
it out, you know.
yeah. It's Yeah, otherwise you end up being like V'ger from the first Star Trek film, right? You take it all in and then your head blows up, and yeah, you have to put it
I
out
can't remember
somewhere.
that, but okay. It might happen anyway, but who knows?
Right, mate. Well, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate
I
the
appreciate you having me on. It's been fun.
yeah,
It's
no, I'm hoping to get this out the door here by Christmas holidays.
okay.
And I don't know where it's going to go. I've been blessed to meet some pretty incredible people in my life
Yeah, yeah,
on the
yeah.
road. My buddy Gavin down in New Zealand. I'm going to be interviewing this friend of mine, Kevin, I met at Burning Man. And
Well,
the whole point of this is I think there's some really cool people out there who maybe not online and
yeah,
who aren't on social media addicts like I am, and they have really interesting stories and
mm,
perspectives, and I just want to get it recorded for posterity. So
yeah.
I have no idea how many of these I'm going to do. No clue, man. This might end up being like a 12 or 15 show run, and then I'll shut it
Yeah.
down and that'll be it. Maybe
No, you
it'll
got a
turn.
good voice, man. We need to, and there needs to be people like us, or people like you, certainly, who are going to speak from I wouldn't say common man's perspective, I a normal perspective, because I love people like Yarvin and an academic agent. These are great, great guys, and really listen to what they say. But they are one quite literally academic, you know,
Yeah.
um, and this needs to be translated into working men.
Right. Oh, I guess that's part of the project here.
Yeah,
I guess we'll translators. All
maybe.
right.
All right.
Graham Brown, the Lorryist, everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you, good, and enjoy your Thanksgiving. Hope you have a
All
great day.
right.
Give
Thank
my
you.
regards to your wife, the kids, and so on.
Yeah. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye bye. Bye.